to start with a little visualization, if you will indulge me. So I want you to picture that this lovely building that now houses the Museum of Howard County History, that was built in 1895 as church, doesn't exist. And in fact, the city of Ellicott City also doesn't exist. And that leaves us with vast rolling hills of green forests. Going back centuries before that, we have forests that were sparsely inhabited by humans, but still full of life, of turkey and elk and deer roaming along paths by the Patuxent and the Patapsco rivers that led down to the Chesapeake Bay that was full of oysters and shad and sturgeon. And it's this journey that we're going to take together tonight that will tell us about the fascinating history of people and the built environment and the natural landscapes. So that's going to be our journey as we go forward and backward in time, looking at the intersection of the cultural and natural landscapes. So my name is Ann Bennett, as I said earlier. I'm the new Executive Director of the Howard County Historical Society. We are thrilled to partner with the Maryland Center for History and Culture on their Step in History initiative. And you'll be seeing at the very end of the presentation that wonderful frame and how you too can participate and make your own exploration of this site. Okay, so we'll get started on our journey talking about this place, Avalon. And Avalon's identity is not fixed. It's not clearly defined, and that's precisely why I think it's so compelling. It's at the intersection of kind of competing components, if you will. Geographic and political boundaries, political meaning different counties. It's at the competing ideologies of freedom and enslavement. It's the landscape as a result of economic systems, of industry and manufacturing. And it's a place now of, again, wooded hills that's welcoming to all. So we're going to be looking at this intersection. Here we go. And so what's so fascinating about this intersection is where it is physically situated, the actual place of Avalon. And technically, it's within the Baltimore County limits, so it's on the other side of the Patapsco River. But historically, it's in line with the other mills that were part of the history of the Patapsco River Valley, extending into the Howard County area as well. And so if you can just look at this snippet from the Google Maps, we look to see that it's right off of Route 1. It's kind of on the southeast part of Patapsco State Park. And you kind of have to go fairly deep into it. So once you turn onto the road, you got to go into the park entrance road, and then you turn onto Gun Road. So the little red dot, just for your orientation, that's one of the only two existing buildings from the Avalon Mill era. Everything else is gone, and we'll talk about why as we go through the lecture tonight. So that's the visitor center. It's a great historic house. It's a mill worker's house as well. But if you follow Gun Road across the river, you're back in Howard County, and that is where the frame is. That's at the Avalon Pavilion 104 in the Patapsco State Park. So you can kind of get your orientation and your bearings as we talk about it. On the way up to the pavilion, you go under, you can see the Thomas Viaduct, and that'll be an important landmark as we go through. Okay, so I wanted to let you know that we're going to be taking a look, again, as I said, at the intersection of all these competing forces. But the presentation tonight represents really kind of a synthesis of the great research that has been done before me. So I want to set expectations and let you know that a lot of this research is drawn on noted Baltimore County historian John Graham's research on Maryland State Park Ranger Robert Bailey's research, as well as the guidance from Lee Preston and our own research manager, Alexandra Sedor, over at the archives in Miller Branch Library. So my role is really to kind of synthesize and to facilitate and guide you to think about this landscape and to start thinking of the different stories and filling in the gap in the narrative over the course of these couple hundred years. My background is not only in museums, but in archaeology, geography, anthropology, so I couldn't resist a slight pun or an allusion to my archaeology background by talking about layers of human history. So usually we have got layers in the soil. We're going to be talking about layering all those competing forces that I mentioned earlier on top of the history at Avalon. Okay, excellent. How many of you recognize this map? Okay, excellent. A couple of hands. Yes, I could go into great detail on this map, but I won't, but it's a great starting place for our discussion tonight. I should say that I started at the Havre de Grace Maritime Museum, and I was there in 2008, 2009, when it was the 400th anniversary of Captain John Smith's Chesapeake voyages. So this is the map of the Chesapeake, of Tidewater, Maryland, and Virginia, that was done by Captain John Smith in the early 1600s. And that red rectangle is the Patapsco River. It was called Bolus, B-O-L-U-S, flew at the time when it was named, and that's the area that we're looking at. Who wants to point where north is on the map? Yeah, exactly. So cartography was not kind of an exact science at this time. It wasn't codified like we know. So north actually is not at the top of the map how we would all expect it to be today. North is actually to the right. So the top of the Chesapeake Bay is kind of all the way up. And Havre de Grace, like I said, I was from, is all the way at the top of Chesapeake Bay where the Susquehanna River meets. And just as a quick aside or anecdote, the reason for that is kind of due to the arrogance of the explorers and the colonizers at the time, because if you were standing on the shores of England looking west to the Americas, that's how it looked. You weren't looking north and down, you were looking straight, and you would see the Chesapeake Bay straight ahead of you from that perspective. So this gives us a very, very detailed indication of all of those waterways, all of the indigenous peoples that were there at the time of John Smith's exploration. And these are also famous watercolors. You might have seen these as well. These are some watercolors done by John White during the Roanoke voyages in the 1580s in the Carolinas. So these are not quite, but very similar to the peoples and the cultures that would have been in our area. And our area is a little unique because there's not a lot of permanent settlements in the area. It's a lot of campsites, a lot of resource procurement sites, but it's not a ton of campsites or permanent sites. So this was an area for hunting, for gathering resources, for trading, generally between two different Native American tribes or nations. That is the Piscataway, which are Algonquian language-based culture, and the Susquehannocks. And the image of the warrior on John Smith's map is of a Susquehannock Native American. And they were part of the Iroquoian language group. So they were always at conflict with each other, and that happened kind of in this area where we are today. So we're going to take a big jump to the documented habitation of the site. So we're going to kind of break up the history of the Avalon site into a couple of different eras. And we're going to talk first about the Dorsey era of the site, and then we'll move on to the Ellicotts, and then to kind of the natural reclamation of the land here. So I do have to, again, let you know that I'm not going to take a deep dive into the Dorseys or the Ellicotts for two reasons. One, we're here all night. because there's a lot of them, as I'm sure many of you know. The second is I just don't know that much about Howard County history yet, so I'm learning, and this is all really exciting for me tonight. So we're going to talk about this as it pertains to the history specifically at Avalon. But the story does really start in 1761. Caleb Dorsey is an ironmaster, and he founded Dorsey's Forge in the area. And so that's where our built environment really starts. So not only are we kind of fast forwarding a couple hundred years since the contact period, we are now filling in the gaps of the natural environment by talking about the deforestation of the land, of the construction of the forge, of the construction of the factory buildings, and talking about this early industrial production in our area. The first crowbars in Maryland were produced here at Dorsey's Forge under Caleb's ownership. And so I'm going to move a little closer so I can see the screen. Is that okay? All right. It's a little staticky to me. Can you hear that? Is it distracting? I'll try to take a step back there. But that's okay. So again, we don't want to do a whole big deep dive into every single person, but just enough to start getting you to think about the lands, the place, the environment around you in just a little bit of a different way. So the land is leased from the Dorsey family in 1775, is that what it says? By the gentleman pictured there. So William Wetcroft, he is an Irish silversmith from Annapolis, and he verbally leases the land from the Dorsey family. So that will become significant in a little bit. But under his management, the forge produces iron parts for muskets for the Continental Army for the American Revolution. During this time, again, America was still a colony, and colonists were allowed to produce iron, but nothing that was like super useful. So really the crowbars were really one of the only few useful things that could be produced, because the rest would be shipped off to England for the final product. So there was limited iron manufacturing and production here in America. And so that's one of the things. So we have the crowbars, and we have the Mexican parts during the American Revolution. And so the contention starts when Samuel, one of Caleb's two sons, Edward and Samuel, Samuel dies. His brother Edward has a great nickname, Needlehead Ned, says that verbal agreement, that verbal lease was not kind of binding. And so then there's a whole conflict on trying to get a written contract for Wetcroft to lease the land from the Dorseys for the forge. And so this is really the first of a multi-year contention and conflict between Wetcroft and Dorsey, and when they both die, their sons are still fighting the battle for years afterward. But that is only part of our story here at the Forge in the Dorsey era. In 1787, there is a federal tax list and assessment, and the Dorsey land is recorded on this assessment, and you can see a little bit, a snippet of it, and I'll let you again kind of read the rest of the introduction. But it's really good because it gives us very specific dimensions and the types of buildings that were on and associated with the property that became named Avalon. And it's good because, again, they were taxed for the types and the sizes of the buildings, and so that's why large part that was reported. So we have a very good indication in 1787 of what was at the Dorsey property. That's an enlargement of it, so you can read that it was owned by Edward Dorsey, managed by Alan Dorsey, and lists the types of the mills, the coal sheds, the factories, the nail works associated with that property. And here's where we have to point out another page in the 1787 register, this list of taxation. So there was very detailed indication of the buildings, the sizes. They measured every building. Some of them were substantial, 70 feet And this is listing the slaves that were owned by the family. So the red bar indicates the same people, the property owned by Edward Dorsey, managed by Alan Dorsey. And you can see that there's far less detail here. There's no names, there's no ages, just numbers. And so the column, just quickly, we have 67 enslaved individuals on just that portion of the site, just that part of the Dorsey family. So the Dorsey family listed on other properties with other enslaved individuals. The second column, where there's one, indicates that there's one individual with a substantial disability, so they are not taxed. And then the third column lists enslaved individuals between the age of 12 and 50 that were subject to taxation. So if you do the math on these numbers that represent people, Edward Dorsey, Avalon Dorsey Managing has 30 individuals that were of taxable age. That means the rest were too young or too old to be included on this taxation list. But these are the people that literally built the site of Avalon with their forced labor on the buildings that were listed in great detail there, and then kept the forges and the furnaces running. And so this is the page of that Federal Register that we don't often get to see. And again, in between the records, in between the lines. And the final kind of discussion of reading between the lines here is that in addition to the 1787 register, the only other indication of any enslaved laborers, of any individuals owned by the Dorseys come from 18 before deposition. Again, I said the Dorseys were very contentious with the Wetcroft family. So he was deposed in 1804, and in that deposition there was a listing of the names and the scales, the drop scales that the enslaved were listed here on the forged property. And so this is, although we know at this time of these individuals, and again, this is just a very small handful of those that were enumerated on the earlier list in 1787. Okay, yeah, I will try to do my best. I'm trying to avoid the static as well, so yes, thank you for that. Okay, so that was a good, I will stand here, how about that? Thank you, that's a good breaking point. I also want to take a break from kind of that heavy history that we went through to talk a little bit about, very little bit about the iron production, because that will also not only illuminate those job titles that we just saw of the enslaved individuals, but also have a better understanding of the consequences of this manufacturing site on the land. So when we talk about iron ore production, iron ore actually occurs naturally in this area, but it is very difficult to process, very labor intensive. It needs a lot of wood, so all the trees are being chopped down for fuel, into charcoal. It takes a lot of water, so that's why the mill is powering the hammers that move the hands up and down to pound the iron bars. They move the bellows to fuel and cool the furnaces. And it takes a lot of manpower, a lot of labor at this time. And like we saw, there were enslaved individuals, there were free blacks, and there was also convict labor used at the Dorsey Forge during this period. So the iron furnace produced what's called pig or cast iron. And that was what was shipped back to England because, that wasn't a really finished product, but that what would eventually be turned into cannons or ship anchors, things like that. When you refine it further at the forge, that pig iron can be reheated and beat into iron bars, which are then rolled into plates or rolled into plates and then slit into nails, which is what kind of the next part of the site will become. And also more useful things like shovels and plows and like axes and things like that. And we'll also see the puddling mill. We'll see that on the picture in a little bit. That's where the pig iron was converted directly into wrought iron, and the rolling mill was another separate building, and that flattened the wrought iron bars into rails and plates. All right, so that's your scientific engineering interlude for tonight. Oh, and this was a couple of slides that Lee Preston forwarded to me. Saugus Furnace in Massachusetts, if any of you know of it or have been there, they do a great job interpreting this type of history and also what an actual slitting mill is. Again, essentially the nails, the iron was produced and refined, and then the final production for the nail manufacturer, they were put into a slitting mill, which slit the nails into like the nail part, and then they were cut and finished by hand. So there was still kind of, again, that labor-intensive process. So that's why you see blacksmiths, that's why you see finishers, that's why you see nailers listed under occupations, because they were all kind of part of that production. Okay, so we're going to move on to the Ellicott era and the renaming of Avalon. So before this period, Avalon wasn't known as Avalon, it was known as Dorsey's Forge. And this is where the site is expanded. More workers are brought in. So we know from the other tax list that there were at least 67 enslaved individuals. Not all were at that furnace or forge, but still associated with the property and with the Dorsey in general, Allen and Edward. But when the Ellicotts bought the property after a long contention, after Edward dies, the Ellicotts purchased it in 1815. They incorporate it and they rename it Avalon in 1822. The Ellicotts, as I'm sure most of you know, were Quakers, so they did not believe in continuing the enslaved servitude of the individuals who were at that site. And so again, reading through the historical documents, thinking about how that intersection of nature and culture takes place, we have to think about what do you think happened to those enslaved individuals of the Dorseys during this period? Were they moved to a different industrial site of the Dorseys? Were they moved back to the tobacco fields? Or did they self-liberate? They were highly skilled. This was, again, very skilled and intensive work, and that was very profitable skill to have. So they might have sought freedom and tried to escape or save money to purchase their own freedom. So again, those handful of names are really the only record we have at this period, and we simply don't know what happened in this transition period. But again, starting in the 1820s all the way through to the 1840s, this is where the Ellicotts came in. So they were paying the mill workers for their labor, and the Ellicotts had it, like I said, for about 2 decades, for about 20 years or so, and it was not as prosperous as some of their other ventures. And so it kind of it kind of was resold and went through a couple different iterations before it was passed on after the Ellicotts. Yeah, okay, so I just wanted to check my dates. So this is a picture that I took when we were at the ribbon cutting for the Step Into History initiative, and so that is one of the only 2 remaining sites at the Avalon site today. And so that is the visitor center. So when you go to the park, be sure to stop in there. It also talks a lot about the history that you're hearing tonight, and then goes much more into depth on it. So after the Ellicott, it was repurchased in 1848. The rolling mill and the nail factory were removed. They were rebuilt. New frame and stone houses were constructed for the workers, and rails for the B&O Railroad were produced. So that's an important connection for this site. This is the period when production really peaked, this kind of mid-century, these 1840s, 50s, 60s period, when it really peaked. And it then passed in the McCrone Manning era. It really peaked with 140 workers in this village site, and 40,000 kegs of nails were produced in the year 1850. And the peak was 44,000 nails just a couple of years later. And then we get to the print that started it all. So this is the print from the collection of the Maryland Center for History and Culture. This is what is reproduced in the Step into History frame. And this is great because it really encapsulates this peak production. So if you think of, Avalon as we take this visual journey from woodlands to industrial manufacturing to recreational area, and now, back to woodlands again. This is kind of peak Avalon, and so it's even more important that this was captured by the lithographer because this represents Avalon at its biggest and kind of best in this period. So Edward Saxa was a Baltimore-based artist and lithographer, and you'll see some other prints of his that are famous. He did a bird's eye view of Baltimore. He did the one of Ellicott Mills, which we have a copy of in the gallery that you can look at. And he documented sites like Avalon that you see here, as well as other Civil War encampments. And so the Ellicott City one was 1854. This one here is 1857. And you can see that during this period as well, there's a lot of intersection, again, of nature and culture, as it alludes to in some of these articles. So there are the floods and the natural occurrences in the 1850s in those newspaper articles. And here we go. So I wanted to pause on this. Again, this is the highlights of the lecture and of the Step into History initiative. And so I just kind of wanted to take a look at this in a little more detail. So there's a couple things to point out. So we have the Thomas Viaduct all the way in the background where that big red arrow is. And Ranger Bailey said it is inaccurate because it has one more arch in the print than it does in real life. And then we have the river running through, and then the Avalon Dam that was built to help with the control of water for the mills is just off the print there. And then in between you have the different the nail factory is right there in that kind of horizontal building there. And then we have the puddling mill and the rolling mill. Again, one to roll out, one to slit in those two big buildings right there. The rest are mill workers' housing. So these were duplexes coming from the Laurel Historical Society. I know a lot about mill workers' housing. In Laurel, they had 4 units in what would be traditionally called a duplex. Here, these are duplexes. And again, over time, they're either stone or frame, depending on who is owning the land and rebuilding the site. And then we have right there the superintendent's house. So that's, you can kind of tell, it's a little fancier, it's a little bigger than some of the other duplex houses there. And then the one right there is, went too far, is that one. So that's the surviving structure right there. So it's represented nicely on the map, just kind of nestled in among the other ones. And then as you can kind of see, it's fairly accurate. We have the railroad coming through, the B&O, and then you have some open land for grazing of different cattle. There was also cattle and oxen and all kinds of different animals that were listed at different times on the land. And then I forget which one of those, but one of those is the company store. Again, this is a company town, so in exchange for low rent, you were paid, rather low wages, but you had a fairly inexpensive place to live that was in the place where you were working. And it was also very difficult. So if we talk about the difficulties of the job itself, from the forge to the furnaceman to the blacksmith, it was also time consuming. You worked 10 or 12 hours a day, six days a week essentially, or 7 days a week. And it was also really dependent on the river as well. So with the dam and being able to regulate the flow of water into the mill race that ran into the factories to power the machinery, it could really be dependent. So at a time like this, when it is hot and humid and it hasn't rained in a while, that river is not going to be very full. So you are counting on the dam reservoir to supply the water and the force necessary. So it might not have always been steady employment as well in these mill towns. So I think that's all that I wanted to point out. So we'll see this in a different iteration in just a few more slides. Oh, and that is the one of the other Saxa print. So this is 1854. Okay, and now here is when I get to geek out over the maps, but I promise I'll go through quickly. And so one other thing that we talked about earlier is that there is political boundaries. And again, political boundaries meaning Howard County, Anne Arundel County, Baltimore County, where all these people living, where the mill's located. And so one of these important dates to remember is that Howard County wasn't Howard County until 1851. And so that's also a big thing to consider in terms of identity, in terms of record keeping. There was the Howard District in Anne Arundel County before the county was erected. And so researchers like myself, like us tonight, would have to go to a different county to get this information. And so it's interesting to see where all of these documents and where all this history resides. And so we're looking now at 1857, and you can see again in the red rectangular area, you can see where it indicates that Avalon. So you can see the railroad, the road, and the river. And so we can see Avalon kind of situated among those natural and man-made components as well. So also in the same year, 1857, we have an inset from the Baltimore County map. So again, it's kind of far from Baltimore County, but not it's in Baltimore County, but it's kind of far from the city. And so this was one of the insets. And so you can kind of see a variation on the Saxa print, looking at some of the mill buildings as well. And we have the documentation of Manning as his name at the time. So this is post-Ellicott era. And then the Martinet map of Howard County. So you can see, again, that intersection of Howard County, Baltimore County, Avalon Iron Works in that red square as well. And you can see the railroad is becoming a little more dominant, and there's different post offices and stations listed as well. And 1865, the site is still in production, and you can see again Avalon Iron Works, John McCrone listed as the owner. And then this is, again, an engraving, I guess you can call it. Brooks and Company were the owners at this time period, so I believe this is 1869. Yes, 1869. Does it look familiar? Yeah.
Right?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, it's essentially just kind of like a woodcut, kind of engraving version of Saxa's print earlier. So.
One of the Greek, I've been studying the Saxy now.
Okay, yeah.
See that church like building on the hillside?
Yes, exactly.
That's not real.
Yeah.
I've never been able to find any evidence that building exists in prior Greece. So the fact that this one had a Saxy map, both had that building, suggests one copy.
Exactly. Yeah.
Building,
exactly. Yeah. There's not a lot of variation or kind of imagination. But again, this is on an inset of the map in Baltimore. And then in the 1860s, 1866 and 1868 in particular is when it all changes. And so this is when two floods ripped through the area in 1866 and 1868. And you can see some of the snippets from newspaper articles that talk about the devastation in the area, naming Avalon specifically. So in 1866, some of the buildings were damaged, the walls came down, the chimney stacks were damaged. They rebuilt a little bit, the village was still occupied, and then in 1868, almost everything else was destroyed except for the two buildings that we talked about that are still standing. And this is significant. The mill never runs again. It never functions as a mill, it never functions as an industrial site. And as we'll see in the later maps, it just kind of lingers. But it lingers in memory for the next 40 years. It's kind of incredible how much this site had an impact on living memory at the time, which is, in part of why it's still part of our memory today. The highlighted thing is kind of interesting. This barely gets a mention in some of the other secondary sources and some of the published materials. Smith from New York purchases a couple hundred acres. Okay, we saw there's been people purchasing and repurchasing and taking people to court left and right over the past couple hundred years. So why is this significant? It's because we have part of that deed in our collection of the Howard County Historical Society, which is great. And our research manager, Alexandra, was the one to uncover it, as she was helping me with the research. And so this is part of the deed that conveys the land that Smith had bought from New York to the next party, and it lists in the county records the deeds of the Avalon site, and it says, parting this day on the 4th day of April, 1857, being the estate known as the Avalon Nail and Iron Works as described in said deed. And so that is a full-page document that we have in our collection, which I think is really extraordinary to have a very specific part of that story in our collection. And as we go through the next couple of maps, again, keep in mind, nothing exists, or very little exists, of this site anymore. There's foundations, there's frames, there's remnants. Most of it was scavenged, I guess. What could be salvaged was and sold to try to recoup money for the losses of the wood, the timber, the metal parts, the wheels. They were all sold off as a scrap or salvage. But Avalon Ironwork continues to live on in memory. So this is 1873. This is 1877. You can still see now it's called Avalon Station by Elkridge Landing. And then this is interesting. So we're skipping 30 years. This is 1898, almost the turn of the 20th century, from Bromley's Atlas of Baltimore County. And this is again just a weird anecdote connected to your comment earlier, Sarah. There's a Roman Catholic church listed on the property for some reason. So I don't know the answer to that question at the moment. This is some other research clue. But again, Avalon Station, you can see really drills into what was left or what was still inhabitable at the time. And then we poked around in our archives a little bit more and were able to find two pictures that I don't think have ever been on display that show part of the Avalon Dam, the Avalon site in 1907. And so this is segueing into this final chapter of the Avalon site. So we went from the natural landscape to the industrial area to the natural devastation of the era, and now back to reclaiming this area for recreation in the 1900s and into the 2000s. And so this is a picture of the Mitchell family just out for, I guess, a day in Howard County with their young child and their dog at the Avalon Dam site. And you can see the river in the background. And so I think, again, this is just kind of a great example of kind of the excursion style trips that were prevalent at this time. And then again, this final chapter is what is starting to connect us all back to the land that was originally there thousands of years ago. So in 1910, a privately owned company, the Baltimore County Water and Electric Company, they are established. They're in production for about 20 years. And this was in response to making sure that clean drinking water was available to the city of Baltimore. So you can see there's a pumping station. Parts of that you can kind of still see parts of that today, and so it was part of the pools were in place there for about 20 years. In the 20s and 30s, I don't have a picture of it, but we can maybe jump in and talk to you at the end. There's pictures where it was a camping site, a recreational site. There are families from Hutzler's department store in Baltimore. Their families would live in the camp area again. That is essentially what is the state park now during the summer months. And so again, we have people starting to come back and re-inhabit this site. During the 30s and 40s, it was part of this, was it the Civilian Conservation Corps, and they had barracks there, and then in the 40s and during the Second World War, it was barracks for conscientious objectors. What is that, 1954, I think, the state of Maryland purchases the property for the beginnings of the Patapsco Valley State Park in this area. And then much like we heard of just about 100 years earlier, and in much of this area, in Ellicott City, in Laurel, in this area, and even in Havre de Grace, where I'm from, Hurricane Agnes comes through and washes away what was left of the dam, what was left of the pumping stations, and really there is nothing left today, again, except for those two houses. And so this kind of concludes the history, and this is the chance where you get to step further into history, to further your exploration of the site. And so this is your chance to literally step into history. And so this was the initiative that the Maryland Center for History and Culture put forth at the Avalon site. And so this was at the ribbon cutting ceremony. So you can see it's a really cool frame, like a double frame, and you can step in between the two frames, and you can kind of see that didn't catch on a dime, but it is three-dimensional, and there's great information in the back. So it's not just a great Instagram photo opportunity. It's a way to really step into the history and read about the history and situate yourself in that place, in that frame, on that ground, in the park that was part of all of these different intersections of nature and culture. And so that's what you're invited to today. Again, this is part of some of the remnants that are still around today. There's part of the, I think, the canal, as part of the pumping station. There's still some remnants today. There are historical markers that'll help you with the interpretation of the site as well on your way to the visitor center. And so that's all I have today. So I know that was a little bit of a whirlwind. Like I said, it was a way to rediscover some of these stories, to get different perspectives on some of the names like Dorsey and Ellicott that are so familiar to us, and start to kind of train your brain to think in between the gaps and what's reported and what's not reported, and then finally to make your own mark on history and to be the continuation of this site by stepping into history. And the frame is available until September, is that right? So you have all through the summer and into September to go to the Avalon site, into the Patapsco Valley State Park, and make yourself part of the history of this site, of this place. So before I get rid of this microphone that's been driving me crazy, I'm going to thank you again, invite you to contact me for follow-up tonight, for any questions related to the museum or the Historical Society. I invite you to come back to this museum and the one next door, the Children's Museum, Saturday and Sunday, 1 till 5. Again, I invite you to become a member, to make a donation, to take all the literature of our two organizations with you as you go home today. And then just one final ask, that QR code on the screen and on the tiny piece of paper on the table on your way out has a link to our engagement survey, or community feedback survey. You don't have to be a resident of Howard County. You don't have to have come to any program prior to tonight. It is open to anybody and everyone willing to give a couple minutes of their time to help us improve, to help us know what you need, and to know what we can do better, know what we can continue to do, and just be really responsive to the needs of everyone in this area. So thank you for taking the survey. Thank you for listening to me tonight. And I'm happy to try to answer any questions. If not, then again, just thank you for coming.